Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story that's kind of soothing, kind of nerdy, and definitely involves a lot of squinting. Dim the lights, get settled under your blanket, and let's drift slowly into the surprisingly delicate, slightly odd world of how humans invented glasses. You know, those things some of us now use to hide behind while reading text or avoiding eye contact. We take the first steps in Italy in the 13th century, though really the idea had been gestating for centuries before that. But before we talk about lens grinding and oh no, I can't see, let's set the mood. People back then squinted a lot. They thought aging eyes were just part of life, like gray hair or creaky knees. And then one day someone had the bright idea, maybe bending light through something clear will help. Now, the earliest hints. Scholars had long toyed with magnifying glasses, reading stones, and little glass spheres filled with water. By the 1100s and 1200s, monks and scribes used polished rock crystal or transparent quartz to magnify small text. These were slow, heavy tools. But someone had to decide. No, actually, we'll make this wearable, because why not double down on impractical brilliance? In northern Italy, in places like Venice and Florence, glassmaking was a refined art. The city-states were hubs for trade, artisans, and wealth. Glassmakers had honed clarity, thickness, purity, all the qualities you'd want if you were trying to peer through a tiny lens. So around the late 1200s, scholars often cite somewhere between 1280 and 1300, the first wearable spectacles appeared. We don't have a patent filing or an inventor's diary, but there are mentions. City records in Florence speak of spectacles being sold, and sermons that criticize people for reading at night with miracles of glass. Imagine the scene: a man in a robe, maybe a monk or a scholar, sits at a candle-lit desk. He holds a curved glass lens in front of the parchment. Maybe he leans too close, then too far, until the letters resolve. Then he glances over at the audience or congregation and says, "Yes, I confess, I now have glass." The congregation gasps or yawns. These early glasses were simple, to flat or slightly convex lenses held in frames made of wood, bone, leather, or even horn. No arms that go behind the ears yet. People perched them on their noses or held them. They were called rimmed glasses. The type that rests on the nose, that's what many early wearers used. It must have felt a bit precarious, like balancing cherries on your nose. Or more accurately, balancing blurry text on a slab of glass, because the glasses were crude. Their prescription was generic. Everything was a bit fuzzy, but less fuzzy than before. They didn't correct for weird astigmatism or high prescription strengths. Still, for monks copying manuscripts or for jurists reading legal texts, even a little clarity was a gift. Now, what's fun and a little tragic is how some people felt about these new optical gadgets. Some folks, especially pious ones, worried about vanity. Are we meddling with God's design? Someone might mutter. Others suspected witchcraft, or thought that wearing glasses made you appear odd or too scholarly for your own good. But, once the benefits set in, less eye strain, longer reading hours, fewer mistakes in copying texts, the tool quietly spread. Over the 14th century, glassmakers and lens grinders experimented. They improved clarity, reduced impurities, refined polishing. The frames got lighter, the glass, or crystal, got thinner. By the late 1400s and early 1500s, the spectacle became more common in Europe. They sold in markets. Artisans specialized in spectacle shops, glass signatures, workshops next to cathedrals. A person could buy a pair of reading spectacles like one might later buy a quill or ink. Let's float over to a specific early user, the scholar Francesco Petrarch 1304 to 1374, is sometimes credited with using reading stones or early lenses later in life. While we can't conclusively place glasses on him, he complained in letters of eyesight troubles. In 1367, he wrote about "my poor eyes failing me," very relatable. Others more certain. Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa 1401 to 1464 is recorded as owning spectacles, and cheers to the observers. The younger generation of Renaissance thinkers adopted them. They became symbols of scholarship, wisdom, and perhaps a slightly frail complexion. Glasses also moved from the private study to the public square. Portraits of scholars, clerics, and lawyers began showing them in the 15th and 16th centuries. They became part of the visual identity of learned men. And yes, there are a few early portraits of women with spectacles, though rarely. Society, of course, limited women's opportunities to read, so fewer needed them in records. But those few images suggest the idea you could be learned and also squinting less. Let's drift a little to how lens technology evolved. By the 16th century, artisans learned key optical principles, curvature, focal length, and ground lens theory. They realized a steeper curvature bends light more, so they could produce lenses with stronger magnification. Also, they began to use two lenses together bifocals, in a primitive sense, or lenses of different shapes to reduce distortions. During this time, spectacle design also got better. Instead of having to perch the lenses on the nose, you got side pieces and arms that could rest on the ears. The temple support emerges, frame materials improved, metal, iron, brass, and eventually steel. These frames could be thin, adjustable, stylish, or at least as stylish as medieval frames get. By the 17th century, glasses had firmly entered intellectual life. Scientists, astronomers, and mathematicians used more precise lenses to read fine observation tables, stare at telescopes, or examine minutiae in nature. Galileo, for instance, used lenses in telescopes, though that's a bit adjacent to spectacles, but still part of the optic revolution. As lens-making techniques improved, spectacle makers catered to many kinds of vision correction, for distance, near vision, and something midway. Now, ironically, as glasses became widespread, people also moaned about their inconveniences. They fogged up, scratched, slipped, broke. You needed cases, repair kits, and lens cleaners, often cloths of silk or fine linen. This created a small accessory economy. By the 18th century, spectacle shops sold spare lenses, replacement frames, cases lined with velvet. Basically, they'd invented a mini accessory business. Let's pause on a slightly more personal note. Think of a scholar in 1600, maybe in Paris or Amsterdam, perched by candle light. He has a pair of spectacles, somewhat bulky. He turns the frame slightly, crouches near his desk, sighs, "Oh, I wish I had these earlier." Then he loses a lens, and spends half an hour rummaging across his wooden desk for the small disc. That kind of small frustration must have been real. But when he succeeds, he leans back and reads without as much strain. That calm moment, that's what this story is about. Let's drift now to some odd quirks and side stories. Around the 17th and 18th centuries, some spectacle makers concocted bizarre night glasses, lenses claiming to help reading by torchlight or dim light. Others made spy glasses akin to small telescopes. There are records of tinted lenses. Early sunglasses, in a crude way, lenses tinted with sea green, blue glass to reduce glare. Not as sophisticated or protective as modern ones, but the idea is there. Another interesting arc, as literacy rates rose, more people needed glasses. Merchants, notaries, even tailors reading fine print, so supply increased. Spectacles moved out of elite study halls into middling class shops. The cost dropped relatively. More people could own a pair. The identity of who wears glasses changed. It was no longer solely the signet of a scholar, but sometimes just a practical tool. By the 19th century, industrialization brought mass production of lenses and frames. Optical science matured, better lens coatings, more precise grinding, better materials. Spectacle frames diversified, wire frames, folding frames, rimless styles. The telegraphs and printed books demanded more reading, so glasses became nearly mundane. From a personal perspective, many wearers reported feeling old or infirm when they first put on spectacles. "I, a man in my prime, need these little glass discs to see," they'd sigh. Others embraced the shift. "With these I read farther, see finer, work longer." Glasses slowly shed stigma. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they were accepted. The bespectacled professor, the bespectacled clerk, a commonplace image. As a soothing aside, imagine how weird it must have seemed to someone in 1300 who sees you now, wearing ultra-thin lenses in metal frames, walking around under artificial light, reading on glowing screens. They'd have a hard time believing you'd be the wizard of clarity. And they might ask, "Where do you get your glass?" You say, "Amazon Prime." We've now traced this slow, serene birth of spectacles, from monks squinting over manuscripts, to artisans grinding glass in dusty workshops, to the gradual normalization of eyewear. That's our foundation. In the next segment, we'll wander into the quirks and tragedies of some famous people who literally couldn't see well, royals, scientists, authors, and how their blurry vision shaped their lives and perhaps their reputations. Or, whether they bumped into walls because they refused to wear glasses in public. Stay relaxed, eyes half closed, and I'll continue. So, let's drift gently into the world of the blurry and the stubborn, because not everyone who needed glasses actually wore them, especially not the royals. You see, royalty had an image to maintain, divine, infallible, elegant, and apparently, that didn't include squinting like a confused owl. Kings and queens throughout history were often half-blind and completely unwilling to admit it, which, to be fair, is very on-brand for monarchs in general. Take King George III of Britain, for instance. He's mostly remembered for losing America, but he also lost something else, his ability to see clearly. In his later years, George suffered from cataracts and poor vision, but like many kings, he refused to wear spectacles in public. Glasses were seen as a mark of age or frailty, not wisdom, so he'd rather strain and fumble his way through paperwork than admit he couldn't read half of it. Maybe that explains some of his decisions. Just saying. His granddaughter, Queen Victoria, also had vision troubles. Late in life, she reportedly used spectacles, but they were kept discreet. A monarch, apparently, should have perfect eyesight, another divine privilege, like being born rich and having your face printed on coins. When you think about it, it's sort of poetic that these rulers who claimed to see all could barely read a menu without help. Let's float back further, to Renaissance and Enlightenment Europe, where the scholarly elite embraced their lenses. Benjamin Franklin, for instance, gave us bifocals, the ultimate invention for indecisive eyes. He got tired of switching between glasses for reading and for distance, so he just cut the lenses in half and fused them together. A practical man, though one imagines his assistants quietly praying they wouldn't be asked to make trifficals next. And while Franklin was happily tinkering away in the colonies, across the ocean in Europe, lenses were becoming fashionable among intellectuals. Spectacles were status symbols, proof you read too much, studied too hard, and had opinions on Latin grammar no one wanted to hear. Portraits from the 18th century began showing thinkers with glasses perched delicately on their noses, as if to say, "I'm brilliant, but my corneas have suffered for it." Of course, not all lenses were equal. Cheaper glasses meant thicker, clumsier lenses that distorted your face. The rich could afford crystal clarity. The poor looked like they were staring through the bottom of a bottle. Early opticians tried to offer personalized lenses, but accuracy was limited. They relied on trial and error, and sometimes a shrug. You'd tell the spectacle maker, "It's still blurry," and he'd reply, "Yes, but less blurry than before." No, let's drift to France for a moment. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who nearly conquered Europe, had eyesight issues, nearsightedness. According to some accounts, he often squinted at battlefields through a telescope, trying to see troop movements. It's ironic, really, The man known for his vision of empire could barely see distant hills. But true to form, he refused to wear spectacles. He'd rather peer dramatically through a spyglass, which somehow felt more imperial. There's probably a metaphor there, the blind ambition of empire built on blurry perception. But let's not get too philosophical, we're trying to stay sleepy here. Across the centuries, vision was always tangled with vanity. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as glasses spread, people invented more discreet options. The pince-nez, for example, those little clip-on lenses that pinch your nose and make you look like an underpaid librarian. Or the lorgnette, a pair of glasses on a stick, mostly used by aristocratic women who wanted to read programs at the opera without admitting they couldn't see the stage. Imagine holding your glasses like a wine glass, delicately, pretending it's fashion rather than necessity. That's 18th century denial at its finest. But things got truly strange in the Victorian era. This was when science, vanity, and capitalism collided and created an entire market of ridiculous vision enhancers. People sold blue-tinted glasses to calm the nerves, green ones to soothe the eyes, and even smoked glass for mental repose. Spoiler, none of it really worked. But it looked elegant, and that was half the point. There's something charmingly human about it. The refusal to accept biology without a stylish accessory. Meanwhile, opticians were getting better at their craft. By the mid-19th century, eye testing became more precise. Lenses could be made to exact strengths, frames more comfortable. Glasses turned from oddity to necessity, though they never quite lost their social stigma. For eyes jokes have been around longer than you'd think. Even in the 1800s, writers teased scholars for their spectacles, associating them with bookishness, frailty, and, somehow, romantic failure. Apparently, clear vision didn't make you more attractive. Let's float gently to America again. In the early 20th century, industrialization and mass literacy made spectacles a household item. Factory workers, teachers, clerks, everyone read more, strained more, and needed more correction. The New World demanded clearer sight, literally and figuratively, and so, glasses became democratic, no longer just for monks or monarchs, but for the masses, though people still tried to hide them, especially women, who were told glasses made them unfeminine, because, of course, society never misses a chance to make practicality a fashion crime. Advertising picked up on this tension. Early 20th century spectacle ads promised lenses that would restore beauty and conceal weakness. Glasses were marketed like magic spells, tools to make you both smarter and more attractive, which is still a bit of a stretch. Some companies even claimed their lenses could train your eyes back to perfect vision if worn long enough. Spoiler again, they couldn't. Somewhere along this timeline, glasses also became a sort of identity badge. The philosopher's spectacles, the poet's spectacles, the scientist's spectacles. You could almost guess a person's field by the size and shape of their frames. Round lenses for the dreamers, narrow ones for the pragmatists, and thick ones for those deep in existential despair. Eventually, eyeglasses stopped being medical devices and became a personality trait. And then came sunglasses, the glamorous cousins of spectacles. Initially designed for doctors and Arctic explorers, they soon made their way into Hollywood. By the mid-20th century, sunglasses were the definition of cool. Ironically, the same thing people once hid, their poor eyesight, turned into a fashion statement. Audrey Hepburn, James Dean, all the way to modern influencers. Everyone's hiding behind tinted lenses now, not from bad eyesight, but from too much visibility. There's a kind of poetic justice in that. The same technology that once made people embarrassed now makes them mysterious. We went from monks reading by candlelight to celebrities avoiding paparazzi flashbulbs, all through a few centuries of improved glass grinding. The tool of shame became the accessory of allure. Human nature, summarized in one clean, circular lens. If you think about it, slowly, dreamily, the history of glasses is really a story about how humans refuse to accept their own limits. Our eyes fail us, so we invent glass. The glass fails us, so we tin it, polish it, redesign it, and call it style. We keep pretending we can see everything clearly, though we rarely do. Maybe that's the most human thing of all, staring through our own lenses, always trying to make the world a bit less blurry. Now let's float on to the people whose entire worldview, quite literally, was shaped by their poor eyesight. The painters who couldn't see their own masterpieces clearly, the kings who ruled empires through a haze, the inventors who built the modern world one squint at a time. But we'll keep it calm, steady, and just a little foggy, because that's the mood tonight. Let's keep drifting, eyes half closed, mind somewhere between history and daydream, and we land quietly in the studio of an old Dutch painter. It smells faintly of oil, dust, and bad eyesight, because tonight, we're talking about the artists who couldn't really see what they were painting, and somehow made that a style. Take Rembrandt. The poor man's eyesight faded over the years, and you can actually see it happening in his self-portraits. Early on, sharp details, crisp lines. Later, the edges blur, faces melt into soft patches of light and shadow. People sometimes call that emotional depth. It might also just be, well, nearsightedness. But let's be generous. Vision loss as artistic innovation sounds better. Then there's Claude Monet. By his 60s, cataracts had turned his world into a sepia fog. He kept painting anyway. Water lily, bridges, reflections, all a little smeared, like looking through dirty glass. Historians love to say it was deliberate impressionism. Monet himself, not so romantic, complained in letters that everything looked yellow and hazy. He even had one eye operated on and then hated the result, because now the colors looked too blue. That's the kind of dilemma only a 19th century artist could have. Which distorted version of reality to trust? And poor Edgar Degas, the ballerina guy, he started losing his sight in his 40s, which makes his obsession with dancers make more sense. They were bright, moving shapes he could still follow. By the end, he was sculpting instead of painting, because clay doesn't mind if you can't see it perfectly. He'd press and mold it with his hands, as if trying to feel his way back into vision. Quietly tragic, really, but in that calm, late-night way, like a candle burning lower, but still steady. Let's float over to literature. James Joyce, famously half-blind, spent his life writing about tiny details he probably couldn't see. He wore thick lenses, squinted constantly, and had dozens of painful eye surgeries. Yet he wrote Ulysses, a book so detailed it feels like it was written by someone with telescopic vision. Maybe that's what happens when you live half inside your head. The world you imagine becomes sharper than the one you see. And Milton? Yes, Paradise Lost Milton, when completely blind by his 40s. He dictated his entire epic poem to his daughters, line by line. Imagine sitting in a dark room, murmuring verses about heaven and hell while someone scribbles them down for you. He described his condition as darkness visible, which is one of those perfect phrases that only someone blind could invent. His eyes failed, but his imagination refused to. Now, not everyone handled bad eyesight so gracefully. Some rurals treated it like an insult from God. King Philip II of Spain, you know, the gloomy one who ruled during the Armada fiasco, suffered from my pain and blurred vision. But instead of using spectacles like a sensible person, he consulted priests. Maybe, he thought, it was divine punishment for being too pious. Or maybe for invading too many countries. Hard to say. Either way, no glasses, just more praying and more squinting at documents he couldn't read. His Habsburg relatives weren't much better. The dynasty was famously inbred, and eyesight problems came with the package. Charles II of Spain, that poor, tragic creature, could barely chew food, let alone see straight. His eyes were said to point in slightly different directions, a detail painters politely corrected in portraits. Imagine being so royal that even your gaze gets edited for public consumption. It's funny, though, how blindness and power often coexisted. The Roman Emperor Claudius, for example, had weak eyes and a twitch, which made people underestimate him. Everyone thought he was harmless, so they kept him around as a kind of court jester. Then he became emperor, Sometimes not seeing too clearly works in your favor. Less distraction from all the betrayal happening around you. Let's float to the east for a moment. In ancient China, vision was deeply symbolic. Clarity of sight meant clarity of mind, which is unfortunate for the many emperors who went blind from age or illness and refused to admit it. The Tang Emperor Xuanzang reportedly had trouble reading memorials in his old age, so his servants read them aloud, carefully skipping the parts they didn't want him to hear. Absolute power, zero focus. In the Islamic Golden Age, though, they handled vision a bit more scientifically. Arab scholars like Ibn al-Haytham studied optics centuries before Europeans even considered lenses. He described how light enters the eye, how reflection works, basically laying the groundwork for modern vision science. But it took another 1,000 years for people to stop accusing glasses wearers of witchcraft. Progress is slow when fashion gets involved. By the 18th century, spectacles were fully mainstream, yet somehow still a personality statement. Voltaire wore them constantly, and they made him look like the exact mix of brilliance and irritation his writing suggests. Meanwhile, George Washington supposedly owned several pairs, including some tinted ones. When he put them on before addressing his weary troops, he famously said, "I have grown gray in your service, and now find myself growing blind," a master class in humble theatrics, part sincerity, part performance, and very on-brand for a man who knew the power of a good accessory. Speaking of accessories, let's glide over to the 19th century again, where glasses met the Industrial Revolution and romance novels. Suddenly, the bespectacled scholar became a trope. The shy professor, the misunderstood governess with spectacles and secret depth. Writers like Charlotte Bronte sprinkled them in, perhaps out of sympathy. She herself was nearsighted and hated bright light. Glasses, in fiction, meant intelligence tinged with melancholy. Still does, honestly. And of course, the 20th century turned all of that upside down. By the time of the Second World War, glasses were everywhere. Soldiers wore them, generals wore them, even dictators wore them. Hitler, for example, despised being photographed with his reading glasses. It clashed with the image of the perfect Aryan body. He'd rather misread documents than appear mortal. Stalin, on the other hand, wore his wire-rimmed spectacles proudly. They made him look like a patient, bookish bureaucrat instead of what he actually was. It's remarkable how a little piece of glass can rewrite an entire personality. Meanwhile, scientists and inventors, Einstein, Curie, Oppenheimer, turned glasses into a symbol of intellect. That slightly frazzled, underslept look became fashionable among thinkers. The very thing that once marked weakness now implied genius. He looks tired. He must be brilliant. Humanity never really changes. We just rename our insecurities. Let's float gently into the post-war years. Glasses multiplied. Fashion houses joined the game. Cat eye frames, thick black rims, gold wire, plastic in every color. They went from tool to statement. Marilyn Monroe wore them in How to Marry a Millionaire, pretending to be plain. Cary Grant wore them to look trustworthy. Spectacles became costume, a way to tell the world who you were, or who you wanted to be. And somewhere beneath all the fashion, the science kept improving. Better lenses, lighter frames, new coatings. By the 1960s, contact lenses emerged, the secret rebellion against everything glasses represented. People wanted perfect vision and perfect vanity. No fog, no frames, just illusion. It's funny. Humanity spent centuries perfecting the spectacle, only to try hiding it again. Then came laser surgery, of course, which is like science fiction that got a bit too confident. We'll just reshape your cornea with a beam of light. Sure, because what could possibly go wrong? Still, millions lined up, desperate to be free from their frames. For a while, it worked, until fashion circled back around and suddenly, glasses were cool again. Now we're in a world where eyewear is practically identity armor. You can buy fake glasses just for the aesthetic. People who don't even need correction put them on to look more interesting. Somewhere, an old Florentine glassmaker is probably rolling in his grave, muttering, "I polished glass for function, and now they use it for vibes." If you zoom out, slowly, dreamily, You see the pattern. Every generation reshapes glasses to fit its own insecurities. In the Middle Ages, they were miraculous. In the Renaissance, scholarly. In the Enlightenment, rational. In the 20th century, nerdy or chic, depending on lighting. And now, they're just part of the human costume. Transparent proof that we're flawed, clever, and vain all at once. Let's float a little slower now to the quieter corners of history, the everyday people whose names didn't survive, but whose sight did. The monks grinding lenses in dim workshops, turning sand into clarity. The merchants who sold them from little wooden stalls, matching lenses to faces with no machines, just intuition. The seamstresses, the sailors, the scribes, all seeing a little better thanks to someone else's glass. There's a kind of comfort in that. The invention of glasses didn't just change vision. It changed time. It let people read longer, work later, age slower. It stretched the useful span of a life. Before spectacles, old age meant blindness. After them, it meant another decade or two of reading, writing, noticing details. In a way, spectacles gave humanity more years of thought. And yet, we rarely think about them. They sit on our faces, ordinary, invisible until we lose them. But every pair carries that long lineage, from Venetian artisans to modern designers, from scholars in candlelight to you, maybe listening to this, half asleep, with your glasses still on. You could take them off now, if you like. The world will blur a little, but it's softer that way. The history of vision doesn't need to end sharply, it just drifts like candle smoke. Would you like me to continue into the next section, where we wander into how early lenses accidentally led to telescopes and microscopes, and how seeing too much changed the way humans thought about the universe? Let's stay quiet now. The candle's still burning, the air feels slow and heavy, and we're going to drift just a bit further into the strange and gentle story of how our obsession with sight didn't stop at glasses. Because once humanity realized it could correct its vision, it started wondering how far it could extend it. See, that's the thing about human beings. Give us a glimpse of something, and we'll immediately try to see more. We made lenses to read, then thought, why not look at the stars? Or the smallest bug leg? Or our own reflection until we start questioning reality. It's a very human sequence of curiosity and mild existential crisis. We begin in late 16th century Europe, mostly in the Netherlands and Italy, where lens grinders were busy polishing glass for spectacles. Picture a cramped workshop in Delft or Venice, shelves stacked with fragile discs, a fine layer of dust everywhere, and some poor artisan hunched over, turning a wheel, trying to get that perfect curve. One of them, so the story goes, put two lenses together and looked through them, and saw something distant, but larger, a tower, a steeple, maybe a ship's mast, and thus, without realizing it, he had just invented a telescope. It's a bit like tripping and inventing flight. No grand plan, no divine revelation, and just a curious accident, born of boredom and too many lenses lying around. The first name tied to it is usually Hans Lippershey, a Dutch spectacle maker who applied for a patent in 1608. He wanted credit for a device to see distant things as though nearby. Simple phrasing, humble tone, world-changing idea. But, as often happens in history, several others claimed they'd done it first. To other Dutchmen, Jacob Metis and Zacharias Janssen, argued over the same thing. It was like a 17th century tech startup war, except everyone wore doublets and ruffs instead of hoodies. News of this miraculous seeing tube spread like gossip in a small village. Merchants, sailors, and most importantly scientists wanted one. And within a year, the design reached Italy, where a rather curious mathematician named Galileo Galilei got his hands on one. Galileo, being Galileo, did what he always did: improved it, multiplied it, and used it to annoy the establishment. He built a telescope powerful enough to see the moons of Jupiter, the craters of the moon, the phases of Venus, things no one was supposed to see, at least not without divine permission. Imagine it, the church said Earth was the center of the universe, but through his little tube, Galileo saw planets orbiting other bodies. He literally saw heresy. Of course, In true human fashion, he shared his findings with excitement and in return got house arrest, because nothing says thank you for expanding our cosmic understanding quite like permanent confinement. But still he'd proven that the humble lenses, descendants of reading glasses, could upend the entire worldview of civilization. Let's float across the workshop again, to a quieter mind, Antony van Leeuwenhoek, another Dutchman, who was so obsessed with lenses that he spent decades grinding them by hand. His weren't for the sky, though. They were for the tiny. He looked at pond water and saw little creatures wriggling about animalcules, he called them. The first microorganisms ever observed by human eyes. You have to love the irony. The same technology that let Galileo look upward let Leeuwenhoek look downward. From stars to bacteria, both found life where no one expected it. Humanity had built itself a pair of bifocals for the universe. By the 17th century, the world was a different place. Lenses were everywhere, in spectacles, in telescopes, in microscopes. People were peering at everything, from the surface of Jupiter to the veins of a leaf. And all of it began with some Venetian monk tired of squinting at Latin text. It's easy to forget how radical that was. Before lenses, human sight ended where distance or detail began. After lenses, the boundaries dissolved. You could see into heaven and into the hidden world of cells. Suddenly, the universe had layers. Of course, not everyone loved that. Some philosophers worried that extending human vision would distort moral clarity. Seeing too much, they said, could make people arrogant, as if humanity might climb too high on its tower of glass and forget how to look inward. And they weren't entirely wrong. The age of discovery had already taught Europeans to gaze outward. New lands, new skies. The age of optics made them look even farther. It's one thing to wear glasses and read longer. It's another to stare at Saturn and realize you're a speck of dust. Still, for the scholars, it was intoxicating. Telescopes got bigger, more complex, more precise. Every improvement revealed another secret. Isaac Newton, who couldn't resist tinkering with anything involving light, built a new kind of telescope that used mirrors instead of lenses. He was tired of color distortions and, probably, other people. His reflected design became the foundation for most modern telescopes today. By the 18th century, astronomy had become a refined art of observation. Gentlemen with powdered wigs stood under the night sky, peering through long brass tubes, sketching what they saw, sipping wine, and occasionally pretending they understood it all. Microscopes, meanwhile, were doing their own quiet revolution. Naturalists began documenting cells, insects, plant fibers, whole ecosystems invisible to the naked eye. The world turned inside out. People realized life existed on scales too small to imagine. It must have felt humbling, maybe even disorienting. We'd spent millennia inventing gods in the heavens, and suddenly, there were entire universes crawling in a drop of pond water. Still, even as science sprinted ahead, the humble spectacles continued evolving on their own timeline. Lens makers got better at shaping curvature, removing distortions, polishing surfaces. Glass purity improved thanks to chemistry. By the 19th century, optical factories were churning out lenses by the thousands. The line between art and science blurred literally and figuratively, and yet, something about it stayed gentle. Vision correction remained personal, intimate. A person putting on glasses for the first time always described the same feeling. I didn't know the world had edges. You could probably walk through any century and find that same quiet wonder. A Venetian monk, a London tailor, a Boston schoolgirl, each seeing clearly for the first time, blinking like a newborn owl. Meanwhile, the big lenses kept growing. Telescopes expanded to massive observatories. By the late 19th century, they were built on mountaintops, aimed at nebulae and galaxies. Humanity had upgraded its eyesight from candle light to cosmic light, and when Edwin Hubble, in the 1920s, used one of these giant telescopes to discover that the universe itself was expanding, it was really just another step in that same old story, people trying to see farther, then realizing there's always more distance ahead. You can almost picture it, a chain of glass and curiosity stretching across time. A medieval monk polishing a lens, Galileo squinting at Jupiter, Van Leeuwenhoek bending over a droplet, Hubble staring at galaxies, each of them saying, in their own way, wait, there's more, and now here we are, centuries later, staring into screens, tiny glowing lenses layered over other lenses, watching history itself blur and refocus in pixels, still chasing clarity, still pretending we'll ever find it. It's comforting, in a sleepy sort of way, to think about that. The invention of glasses didn't just give us sight, it gave us perspective. It taught us that the act of looking can change the world, that improvement doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's just a clearer view of what was always there. So, as we close this gentle, meandering journey from squinting monks to space telescopes, you might feel a quiet gratitude for the glass resting on your nose or the lenses that light up your screen. The invisible descendants of centuries of curiosity, vanity, and patience. You can take them off now. Let the edges soften. The world's not disappearing, it's just resting, the way it does after a long night of looking too closely at everything. Would you like me to continue into the final section? A calm, reflective ending about how the invention of glasses changed human self-awareness and time itself. Let's just stay here for a moment. Quiet, dim, a little blurry if you've taken your glasses off. The way the world softens without edges feels ancient, somehow, almost like how our ancestors saw everything half in shadow, half in dream. Before lenses, before glass, before clarity became something we expected. Because here's the strange thing about the invention of glasses. It didn't just fix our sight. It changed what we believed sight was for. Before lenses, vision was mystical. People thought seeing was an active force, the eyes sending rays out into the world. That's why the evil eye made sense to them. They genuinely believed vision had power. But then came lenses, cold, polished, logical, and suddenly, seeing became mechanical. Light entered the eye. It bent, refracted, obeyed laws. The sacred act of seeing became an optical process. Beautiful? Yes, but also a little disappointing. You can almost hear the collective sigh of the Middle Ages giving way to the Renaissance. So that's all it is. Just light and glass. But that shift, that quiet demystification, is what made science possible. When people stopped treating vision as divine, they could study it, measure it, improve it. Every polished lens was a tiny rebellion against superstition. Every spectacle wearer was, in a sense, a participant in enlightenment, whether they knew it or not. And of course, humans being humans, we didn't just stop at improvement. We started optimizing. Glasses became more than tools, they became symbols, a mark of learning, of refinement. By the 18th century, scholars and politicians were posing for portraits with their spectacles in hand, even if they didn't actually need them. Because nothing said I'm thoughtful like a pair of small round lenses and a mildly strained squint. Benjamin Franklin, naturally, couldn't resist going a step further. In the 1780s, he got tired of switching between his near and far-sighted glasses. So, in true Franklin fashion, he cut both pairs in half and glued them together. Thus, bifocals were born, half practicality, half stubbornness, entirely Benjamin Franklin. And from that moment, lenses became not just about seeing, but managing how we see. Reading lenses, driving lenses, sun lenses, lenses that filter blue light, so we can stare at our screens longer without feeling guilty. Humanity's relationship with sight became a kind of controlled illusion. We see through layers of correction, tint, and technology. We've literally built reality to suit our eyes. It's quietly philosophical when you think about it. Glasses didn't just fix vision, they began the slow human habit of adjusting the world to match our perception instead of adjusting ourselves to the world. We stopped asking, what is true? And started asking, what can I see clearly? And so, we built microscopes to see smaller, telescopes to see farther, and cameras to see moments again. Lenses became memories. They froze time. They made the past permanent and the future visible. Every photograph, every telescope image, every grainy video an extension of that first moment someone thought, I wish I could see better. We owe entire sciences to that simple wish. Astronomy, microbiology, photography, film, Even the smartphone in your hand right now, its front-facing camera, its layered lenses, it's a descendant of medieval glassmaking and monkish curiosity. The miracle of modern optics is just the long echo of one human squint. But, as always, clarity comes at a cost. The more we perfected sight, the more we started distrusting it. Philosophers began to wonder if seeing clearly meant understanding clearly. Spoiler, it didn't. The Enlightenment birthed skepticism along with science. Seeing is believing became both mantra and warning. By the time we reached the 20th century, lenses were everywhere, on cameras, projectors, glasses, microscopes, and yet people began questioning the very idea of objective vision. How much of what we see is real, and how much is filtered through glass, perspective, or bias? It's ironic, really. The clearer we made our physical vision, the cloudier our mental one became, and still, we kept polishing, because that's what humans do. Every new lens, optical, digital, metaphorical, is a promise of clarity we never quite reach. Even now, our satellites orbiting Mars or peering into galaxies billions of light-years away are us descendants of those little convex circles monks made by hand. And what do we do with them? We look outward, looking for meaning, always squinting at the edge of comprehension. But here's the gentle, sleepy truth. Maybe we don't really want perfect clarity. Maybe part of us still prefers the blur, the softness of a world not fully seen, because clarity leaves no mystery, and mystery, after all, is what gives the mind something to dream about. Take off your glasses, if you haven't already. The world melts just slightly. Lights bloom into halos. Shadows turn gentle. You can't quite make out the edges of things, but that's all right. This is how people saw for millennia, through haze and candle light, through water and time. The invention of glasses didn't end blindness, it simply reminded humanity that sight is something to be tended, not taken for granted, that clarity is fragile, that focus must be earned, and that even now, after centuries of perfecting the art of seeing, we still close our eyes every night and trust the dark to show us what our lenses never could. So tonight, as you drift, think of that long lineage of glass and light, the monks, the craftsmen, the scientists, the quiet polishers who turned sand into vision. They gave the world a way to look, and in doing so, they gave us a way to wonder, because the truth is, history isn't just something to read, it's something to see through, layer by layer, like light through glass. And if you look closely enough, maybe you'll catch your own reflection in it, blinking softly back. Would you like me to continue with a short, dreamlike closing reflection, something that feels like a bedtime outro, wrapping the story into a sleepy fade-out? So now we're at the quiet edge of the story, the part where the lights are dim, the eyes are heavy, and history itself feels like it's humming softly in the background. You can almost hear the faint echo of glass being polished somewhere far away, steady, circular, patient. That's how progress usually sounds. Not like invention, or discovery, or thunderclaps of genius. More like someone quietly sanding down the edges of imperfection, one motion at a time. The story of glasses and everything that came from them isn't about sudden brilliance, it's about long patience. The slow, human kind. The kind that begins with squinting monks and ends with satellites photographing galaxies that no human eye will ever see in person. The kind of progress that takes centuries to notice, but once you do, it feels inevitable, like it was always waiting to happen. When you trace that line, you start to realize how absurdly connected it all is. How a monk trying to read a prayer book in 13th century Italy somehow leads to an astronomer mapping exoplanets in the 21st. How a lens meant for scripture became a tool for science, then for cinema, then for social media filters that let us see ourselves the way we wish we looked. The same principle bent light applied to faith, to truth, to vanity. It's kind of poetic, isn't it? We made something to help us read God's word, and it ended up helping us read our own faces. But that's how humanity works. Every tool eventually becomes a mirror. Lenses began as instruments of clarity, but they've ended up as instruments of reflection. You hold a phone up to your face, look through that tiny piece of glass, and there you are, curated, edited, illuminated. The monk's reading stone has become the front-facing camera. We're still gazing through glass, just in a different direction. And maybe that's why it's comforting to think about where it all began. A world full of blur. People seeing shapes instead of faces, stars instead of constellations, meaning instead of facts. Because the blur had mercy in it. You couldn't see the cracks in your world or yourself so sharply. You could imagine smoother edges, softer truths. The invention of glasses was the end of that mercy, in a way. It was the start of seeing things as they are. The crooked lines, the distance between words, the tired eyes staring back in a polished reflection. It gave us knowledge. Yes, but it also gave us the burden of clarity. And maybe that's why, even now, we spend so much time chasing ways to blur again. We turn off the lights, put away the screens, close our eyes. We retreat into the gentle blur of dreams, where the edges fade and nothing needs to be in focus. The world softens again, just for a while. It's a beautiful contradiction. We spent centuries learning how to see better, and every night, we still surrender to blindness. Maybe that's what balance looks like: light and dark, glass and shadow, waking and dreaming. You can imagine the first person who ever put on glasses, the way their face must have changed. That small intake of breath, that little gasp of disbelief when letters stopped swimming on the page and finally stood still. In that moment, they saw two worlds, the one they'd always known, and the one that had always been there, waiting to be seen. And in a way, that's the story of all human history. We stumble through the blur, inventing clarity one lens at a time. We think we're learning to see, but really, we're learning to notice. So as the night stretches thin and the world outside grows quiet, maybe just sit with that thought. The invention of glasses didn't just sharpen our vision, it deepened our wonder. It made us aware that sight is fragile, precious, and, sometimes, deceptive. It reminded us that there's always something beyond what we can see. And maybe, just maybe, the blur isn't something to fix. It's something to rest in. So close your eyes now. Let the lenses of the day cool in their case. Let your thoughts drift like dust in a sunbeam. Somewhere in the dark, the ancient polishers of glass are still at work, smoothing the edges of history, one circle at a time. And when you wake, and reach for your glasses or your phone, or whatever lens connects you to the world, maybe you'll remember them. The quiet hands that help the world come into focus. The ones who turn sand into sight. Good night, traveler through time. May your dreams be just blurry enough to be beautiful. Would you like the next script in this same, sleepless historian style? Perhaps a continuation on the most inbred monarchs in European history, or what cavemen actually did all day. Let's not open our eyes just yet. The story ain't quite done. It never really is. History has this quiet way of looping back on itself, like a reflection in an old, uneven mirror. You think you've reached the end, but the glass always shows another layer beneath, because the invention of glasses didn't just change how we saw the world, it changed how the world saw itself. Once humans learned to correct vision, they began trying to correct everything else. Focus became a metaphor, clarity became a virtue, and seeing clearly turned into a kind of moral pursuit. We talk about having vision in leadership, foresight in planning, insight in wisdom. It's all optics now. The vocabulary of lenses and light, baked into how we think. Imagine that. A medieval object meant for reading in dim candlelight ended up rewriting our language for truth itself. It's kind of funny when you think about it. We don't say I understand, we say I see, because seeing is believing, and believing is, well, seeing what you want to, most of the time. That's the irony, isn't it? The clearer our vision became, the better we got at creating illusions. The more we understood light, the easier it became to bend it, through glass, through film, through screens. The very tools that once revealed the truth now specialize in disguising it. Glasses begat microscopes, microscopes begat photography, photography begat cinema, and cinema begat a digital world where we see everything, yet understand almost nothing. We've perfected sight and lost perspective. It's very on brand for humanity, but none of that could have happened without those first, clumsy spectacles. A monk squinting at parchment might as well have been holding the blueprint for the future. He just didn't know it. Over the centuries, we didn't stop at fixing poor eyesight. We began engineering new kinds of eyes. Cameras became mechanical vision. Telescopes became cosmic eyes. Satellites became planetary ones. And now, AI digital vision stares back at us, recognizing faces, patterns, emotions. Humanity made lenses, and eventually, the lenses learned to look back. We gave sight to the inanimate, and now the inanimate interprets us. The line between the seer and the seen has blurred, appropriately enough. And still, the purpose hasn't changed. We're trying to understand the world, to bring it into focus. But we keep discovering that every time we sharpen one image, another goes fuzzy. Every time we learn to see farther, something closer slips from view. Maybe that's just how it's meant to be. Perfect clarity would leave nowhere to go. So the story of glasses, in the end, is the story of human limitation, and our refusal to accept it. We took sand and turned it into a way to fight blindness. Then we took blindness and turned it into philosophy. Every lens we've ever made has been a quiet rebellion against the edges of perception. And yet, there's beauty in the imperfection. Maybe the blur was never the enemy. Maybe it's the reminder that not everything is meant to be seen clearly. Some things, love, memory, faith, time, lose their shape when you focus too hard. Even the clearest lens can't show you what's gone. It can't bring back the face that's faded from a photo, or the light that once reflected off a distant planet now dead and cold. All it can do is offer you the illusion of clarity for a moment. A glimpse of sharpness in an otherwise soft and infinite world. And that's enough. That's all it's ever been about, a moment of focus in the blur of being alive. So here we are again. You, lying still in the dark, the faint hum of the present around you, the echoes of all those glassmakers, astronomers, and dreamers behind you, each one holding a piece of light, bending it just enough to see something new. They didn't know they were changing the human story. They just wanted to see the next word, the next star, the next heartbeat in a drop of water. That's what all of this has been. Really, a long chain of people trying to see just a little bit more. And maybe that's what makes the story so gently beautiful. Because in a world where everything eventually blurs, kingdoms, empires, faces, names, we still keep looking, still polishing, still believing that sight itself might lead us closer to understanding. So, when morning comes, and you open your eyes to the pale light creeping through the window, just remember that light traveled through a billion particles of dust, through glass you didn't make, through lenses you didn't invent, all to reach you, to let you see. That's what history is. A beam of light, refracted through time, landing softly on the surface of now. You can blink, you can let it fade. The glass will still be there, waiting. Because sight, like history, is never really lost. It just waits for someone else to look. Good night. Would you like me to begin the next sleepless historian script? Perhaps the most inbred monarchs in European history. In the same tone and structure.